California is facing a homelessness crisis that is getting worse despite the significant amount of money spent to address it. The state has spent nearly $10 billion between 2018 and 2021 to provide services to more than 571,000 people, each year helping more people than the previous year, but a majority of those Californians still remain unsheltered at the end of year 3. The state's Interagency Council on Homelessness issued a report that detailed the spending and outcome, but it did not address how the state can spend its money more effectively. Homelessness services are disjointed, spread among 9 state agencies, hundreds of county and municipal governments, nonprofits, and charitable organizations. Assemblymember Luz Rivas has introduced a bill that would demand tangible results from local governments before they receive homelessness grants, mirroring an idea from the governor's own budget proposal. The report shows that California has spent $5.5 billion on housing between 2018 and 2021. Some of that spending has been more likely to lead people out of homelessness than others, with only 8% of the more than 75,000 people placed into permanent supportive housing ending up back on the street within 6 months. Despite the spending, the problem remains intractable, with the report noting that one of the largest challenges facing the state is the inflow of new people into homelessness, even as efforts to help people experiencing homelessness expand. In Culver City, a new anti-camping ordinance has been met with fierce criticism from leaders and residents who say it will displace the most vulnerable to make way for gentrification in the rapidly changing city. Council members voted to ban tents and makeshift structures in public spaces, a step other nearby cities have tried only to be stopped by legal challenges. California is the epicenter of the nation's homeless crisis, with more than 170,000 people living in tents and cars and sleeping outdoors on sidewalks and under highway overpasses. A 2018 federal court decision found that criminalizing homelessness, including prohibiting sleeping in public, violates the U.S. Constitution and amounts to cruel and unusual punishment if no shelter beds are available. Proponents of the ordinance say the city must stay in lockstep with surrounding communities to prevent more unhoused people from taking up residence on its streets. But opponents say the ordinance has been rushed and will criminalize already marginalized people, especially Black and Latino residents who are more likely to experience homelessness. Homelessness policy experts across the state are responding to the report, which may provide some helpful hints about what's working, what isn't, and for whom. California lawmakers are calling for accountability and tangible results. An audit of the state's homelessness spending has been requested, and many want to see the state's money come with strings attached. The challenge facing the state is the inflow of new people into homelessness, even as efforts to help people experiencing homelessness expand. Where are the state's billions going? Here are 4 takeaways from the homelessness assessment. 1. California has been spending a lot to remedy homelessness, mostly on housing. Between 2018 and 2021, the state spent $9.6 billion trying to move the needle on homelessness. Many Californians will be able to relate. The bulk of the spending, $5.5 billion in this case, went to the cost of housing. That includes everything from building new units to preserving old ones, converting unused hotel rooms during the pandemic into temporary housing, building shelters, and setting up permanent supportive housing facilities that provide a long-term subsidized place to stay along with other on-site social services. According to the report, the state produced or kept online 58,714 affordable housing units in the 3-year period, and added 17,000 new shelter beds. Some of that spending has been more likely to lead people out of homelessness than others. Of the more than 75,000 people placed into permanent supportive housing of some kind, for example, only 8% wound up back on the street within 6 months. Conversely, for those who left a state-funded program to live with a family member or a friend, the rate of those who were homeless again within 6 months doubled. And for those who left for a rental with only a temporary subsidy, that rate of return to homelessness was 23%. For some legislators and advocates, the figures underscored the importance of building more housing above all other interventions. Shelters are very expensive to build. They're very expensive to operate, said Emily Halkin, the director of Sacramento County's Department of Homeless Services and Housing. What we know is a real solution is housing. But building more housing, particularly with subsidized rents or other wraparound services, is expensive. That's in part why some homelessness and housing advocates say the 10-figure sum that the state has spread across the 3 years of the assessment isn't even close to enough. A report from the Corporation for Supportive Housing in the California Housing Partnership at the end of last year put the price tag of solving homelessness in California at $8.1 billion every year for more than a decade. 2. A lot of people have been housed, but most have not. The report tracked more than 500,000 Californians who, over the 3-year period, made use of at least one of the services that the state funds, as recorded in a new state database. The good news: more than 40% ended up in housing, supportive, subsidized or otherwise. The bad news: the majority didn't, or the state lost track of their whereabouts. Nearly 17% were, at the end of the period, still in a shelter or temporary housing of some other kind or had exited whatever program they were enrolled in into homelessness. Another quarter fell out of the system entirely, their destination unknown. Assembly member Corey Jackson, a Democrat from Paris who chairs the Assembly Human Services Committee, asked about the 17% who returned to homelessness, which he called a red flag in the data. "We need to remember that this is the emergency response system, if you will," responded Dakshike Wickrama, the Deputy Secretary of California's Business, Consumer Services and Housing Agency. "What more can we be doing which is outside the homeless system? It's like when you go to the emergency room. What could the primary care physician have done to prevent the acute diabetes?" 3. The burden of homelessness is not equally distributed. Drawing on the most recent point in time survey, which provides a blurry snapshot of how many people are living outside on a given night, the report emphasizes the stark racial and ethnic disparities that exist across the state's unsheltered population. Black people made up roughly 30% of the people counted on the street, more than 5 times their share of the state population. Indigenous Californians likewise were overrepresented 5-fold. And though Latino Californians were underrepresented, between 2015 and 2020, their numbers in surveys of the unsheltered increased by 65%, the fastest growing ethnic or racial group. 4. Not all homelessness looks the same. When politicians or talking heads use the word homelessness, it's often meant to evoke a particular person experiencing a particular set of problems. Someone asleep on the sidewalk, unbathed, suffering from acute mental illness, addiction, physical disability or some combination of the 3. That's the most visible version of the state's homelessness crisis, but as the new figures show, it isn't the most common one. According to the report, 1 in 5 people who enrolled in state-funded homelessness programs were considered chronically homeless, unsheltered for at least a year while living with a complicating health issue. But more than 3 times as many, 2/3 of all who sought state-funded services for homelessness, were people who hadn't popped up in the system for at least 2 years, if ever. These might be families evicted and temporarily residing in a car, someone couch surfing while gathering the money for a rental deposit, or people who got their own apartment only to get slammed with an unexpected car payment and find themselves back in a shelter. Acknowledging that continuum matters, not just for the sake of accuracy, said Assemblymember Wendy Carrillo, a Los Angeles Democrat, but because different paths into homelessness might be best met with different pathways out. Whether it's someone living in their vehicle, being evicted from their home, someone experiencing chronic homelessness for decades, living on the streets of Skid Row for many, many years, all of these things are different, she said. They need to have different solutions.